Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this CRSB webinar on understanding and promoting mental health in agriculture. My name is Monica Hatteritz, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. Mental health is an especially important topic right now during these uncertain times, and we hope that you find the information and resources that are shared today useful for you and your family and others. This is the third in a series of webinars being hosted by CRSB. If you didn't get a chance to attend or would like to circle back, feel free to visit our website at crsb.ca under About and Events for recordings of the other webinars. And if you just flip to the next slide, here's the agenda for the webinar today, which we will keep to 1 hour, and we're going to wrap up at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. We're going to, after I finish with some opening remarks, we're going to have Cynthia Beck, a beef and grain farmer from Saskatchewan and research assistant in suicide intervention response with the online therapy unit at the University of Regina. She's going to be followed by Heather Watson, who's the Executive Director of Farm Management Canada, and then Stewart Skinner, a pork producer from Ontario and member of the Board of Directors with the Do More Ag Foundation. He's going to wrap up the presenters today, and that's going to be followed up with a question and answer session. Thank you for being with us today to discuss mental health and agriculture. Following the presentations from each of the speakers, there will be, like I mentioned, a Q&A, a question and answer period using the question and answer window on your webinar portal. And Andrea White, she's our Community Engagement and Marketing Manager. She's going to provide a bit more details on the logistics and how things are going to flow. So over to you, Andrea.
Great, thanks, Monica. Good morning, everybody. Just before we get started, just thought I'd review a couple of logistics about the webinar today. If you haven't been on one of ours before, you'll notice that you'll all been muted as you logged on to the webinar today, so you will stay muted for the whole event. And following our featured speakers, as Monica has mentioned, we'll open up to a Q&A session where you can pose questions to any one of our speakers, and this will be done, if you see at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel, there's a questions pane, and you can simply just type your question in there. It will come to us, and then we will read the questions out loud and address them to the speakers and have our speakers answer them for everybody. And just a note that you can enter your questions at any point in the webinar. They'll come to us and we will do that Q&A session at the end. We'd also like to note that the webinar today is being recorded for anyone who's registered, wasn't able to attend, or if you wanted to go back to it, and we will be sharing those recordings on our website a couple days after the webinar. And with that, I think I will pass it over back to Monica, and she's going to provide a brief overview about the work of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef.
Great, thank you. And just a very brief overview about the CRSB and who we are for those of you who are on the call or on the webinar today and may not be familiar with us as an organization. So the CRSB is a multi-stakeholder, not-for-profit organization, and our mission is really to advance continuous improvement of Canadian beef industry sustainability, and we do that through engagement, collaboration, communication, and science. We have 3 core pillars that we work on at the CRSB. The first is our benchmarking pillar, and really what we do there is we benchmark and measure social, economic, and environmental performance of Canadian beef from farm to fork, and then set a sustainability strategy to continually improve that performance. Our second pillar of work is our Certified Sustainable Beef Framework. That's a voluntary certification program that recognizes sustainable practices in beef production and processing, and that's measured through our sustainability standards and a third-party audit. It also supports retail and food service companies who want to make sustainable sourcing commitments or claims, and it also provides assurances for customers delivered through a marketing logo and claim. Our third pillar is our sustainability projects pillar, and that really enables us to demonstrate continuous improvement in sustainable beef production through on-the-ground projects that demonstrate, pilot, and promote the goals of the sustainability strategy. And so we feature projects that are submitted to our annual survey, and our scientific advisory committee reviews those projects and approves them, and they're posted on our website at CRSB.ca. So if you flip to the next slide, we've adopted the definition and the 5 principles of sustainable beef from the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, a very similar organization that is operating at the global level. And so when we talk about sustainability in beef, we talk about natural resources, people in the community, animal health and welfare, food, and efficiency and innovation. And one of the things that we've done differently from the global level is that we've called out economic viability. And when we work on those 5 principles, we always have that economic viability lens on each of the 5 principles. And if you flip to the next slide, this slide, we like to share this slide because it shows all of the voting members of the CRSB. We are a membership-based organization, and this slide provides you with a snapshot of all of the stakeholders that have committed to sustainability in beef in Canada. And really, it's the engagement of this collaborative group, along with our other collaborators and partners, that have made Canada a global leader in beef sustainability. So we currently have over 110 members and observers, and our members include beef producer organizations, processors, retail and food service companies, NGOs, food and egg business, academic institutes, scientists, researchers, and youth. And with that background, I would like to flip to an introduction of the panelists today. So I'm really pleased to introduce Cynthia Beck, who is a master's student in the clinical psychology program at the University of Regina. She also works as a research assistant in the online therapy unit and provides suicide intervention response services to Southeast Saskatchewan. Cynthia and her husband, Wade, along with their 2 children, farm in partnership with Wade's family. And the Becks operate a mixed farming operation of cattle and grain near Milestone, Saskatchewan. Heather Watson is the Executive Director of Farm Management Canada, a national nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing the awareness and adoption of beneficial farm business management practices on Canada's farms. Farm Management Canada prides itself on connecting diverse industry stakeholders, from farmers to advisors, academics, associations, private industry, and government, to exchange ideas and insights and increase collaboration for advancing farm business management practices across Canada. Heather is passionate about education and committed to enhancing efforts to encourage better business management practices for a sustainable and truly remarkable agricultural industry in Canada. She presently serves as the Canadian representative to the International Farm Management Association Council and represents farm business management within a number of agricultural advisory groups across Canada. Stewart Skinner is our 3rd panelist, and he was raised on a pig farm in southwestern Ontario, and after a meandering path with some unexpected detours, returned to a full-time farming career in 2016. Together with his partner Jessica Kelly, Skinner founded Imani Farms in 2015, which today is a diverse farm business that is comprised of 3 segments: a commercial swine production system, a niche market swine production system, and organic cropping and an organic cropping enterprise. Stewart lives just around the corner from where he grew up with Jess and their 2 children, Bryce and May. Stewart is a member of the board of directors of the Do More Agriculture Foundation, which is working to change the culture of agriculture so that all producers are encouraged, supported, and empowered to take care of their mental well-being through awareness, community, and research. So with that, what we're going to do is we'll start with Cynthia's presentation and then move straight to Heather and then Stewart, and then we'll follow that up with a Q&A. So with that, I would like to hand the mic over to Cynthia, and thank you to the 3 of you for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you to the CRSB for planning this webinar. I think that it's very important that we are discussing mental health and agriculture, especially right now with everything that's going on with the COVID pandemic. And with that, I think that it's really important that there's lots of talk about mental health and what is mental health and what we can do to fix our mental health, that type of thing. But I think that for us today, it's really important that we address what is mental health to us as a beef producer. So I am a beef producer. I grew up on a beef farm. We have a beef farm now. So I think that it's important that we address what is mental health to us, the beef producer. And it's our ability to meet our daily responsibilities, excuse me. So you have the ability to get up in the morning, to get yourself dressed, to go look after yourself, your family, your cattle, to care for your animal's well-being. It's also the ability to make decisions and plan ahead. Let's face it, if you are dealing with mental health difficulties, it might be really hard to decide what to do today, let alone make decisions for a year from now when you're planning on what you need for feed and bedding for the winter months. So mental health is really important to be able to make those long-term decisions. Mental health for beef producers, it's also balanced thinking, balanced emotions, and we have the ability to communicate in a healthy way. So there's healthy ways of coping. Also, it looks like I'm having some problems here. Hopefully you're still getting me. It's also, mental health is also having the satisfaction or enjoyment with life. So hopefully as a beef producer, you are still enjoying what you do. You still sell those calves and you're like, man, that is fantastic. Those cows look so great. If we could move to the side. I'd just like to talk a little bit about signs of decreasing mental health. So sometimes it's really difficult for us to see that we might be diminishing in our well-being or that we're kind of going downhill. And sometimes it's easier for other people to take note of that. So what would you look for in yourself or someone else for decreasing mental health? Well, there might be changes in their appearance. Perhaps they were always a neat and tidy person, and now when you see them, they're not. Or maybe they've lost interest in their usual activities. So that means maybe they're not able to keep the yard clean. Maybe you notice that the buildings are deteriorating, or perhaps the health of their animal's well-being is diminishing as well. Also, if there's changes in eating or sleeping habits, so if a person was typically a healthy eater before and now they're not eating, or their eating has changed drastically. Also, let's face it, it's really hard to get sleep if you are in calving season, but it's still kind of really important. But if a person is telling you that they haven't slept for days, well, that might be a sign that there are some other problems happening for them or challenges. Also, changes in mood. I think that a lot of times when we think about mental health or decreasing mental health, we think that it's only like someone who looks sad or down, or they're crying or emotional, but that's not always the case. Sometimes people might be more frustrated, they might be more angry, or they may be super, super happy. And we might not recognize that as a sign that, hey, they're having mental health challenges. But if they're not normally like an over-the-top happy person and suddenly they are, that might also be a sign that there's some health challenges there. And then finally, if a person is withdrawing from people or activities, so if there was someone who participated in community events and suddenly they are nowhere to be found and people are going, okay, what's going on? Like, we used to be able to rely on that person to help in our community and we can't. Well, perhaps they're having some difficulties as well. And the same goes for the individual. If you were typically a social person and you don't feel like seeing another human being, experiencing that the odd time is normal. But if it becomes kind of a habit, then there's some things that need to be looked at there and investigated. Could we move to the next slide, please? So what helps us? Adequate sleep. Okay, we're beef producers. It's calving time and you might not get enough sleep, but it's so important that you sleep when you can. There is research out there that shows that not having adequate sleep can affect us in the long run. And I really encourage people to kind of look into what happens to your body when you don't get enough sleep. You can't regulate your emotions. It's really difficult to make decisions. And it's hard to communicate. Everything is kind of fuzzy, and that's partially due to a lack of sleep. Also, eating a variety of foods on a regular schedule. Okay, you get up at 4 a.m. to do your morning calving checks, and there's lots on, so you just stay out there. Well, you would never expect your tractor to run a full day without fueling it up. Your body is the same way. You need to fuel your body. That's really important. And staying hydrated is also part of that. Another thing that we can really do to help ourselves with our mental health and well-being is that if we kind of tend to our own business, mind your own business is kind of a saying that I go by. And typically when we start comparing ourselves and measuring our self-worth or our successes against other people, or in comparison with the neighbor, it's not really going to be a winning situation. We're sort of causing ourselves more harm than good doing that. Another thing is listen to your gut. If you feel like you are needing some help or needing some support, then talk to a trusted person. And if you happen to be visiting a neighbor, or you are someone who works in the egg industry and you arrive in a farmyard, and that producer seems to be having some trouble and your gut instinct is saying, like, I need to say something here, then I really encourage you to push past the uncomfortableness of, I don't want to upset them. Well, it's kind of better to upset somebody and them still be here, and you encourage them to kind of start to talk about it so the conversation can begin somewhere. Also, I'd just like to point out that we have some fantastic resources available through the online therapy unit at the University of Regina. For residents of Saskatchewan, we provide free online delivered, internet delivered cognitive behavior therapy. So that's free therapy with a therapist, and it's provided through the provincial government. But also on that website, onlinetherapyuser.ca, we also have resources listed by province. So it's kind of a great location where you can go look into different mood disorders, different supports that are available. And you can also maybe do some learning for yourself or share it with some other people. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to you, Andrea and Monica.
Great, if you can hear me, thanks very much. And I would like to now introduce Heather Watson from Farm Management Canada. And I will just switch the presentation status over to Heather, and she can take it away for her presentation.
All right, so just want to check in, everyone can hear and see me okay. The hair is a little bit different. I call this my COVID hair, but it's still me, I can guarantee that. So thanks so much for the Roundtable on Sustainable Beef for the opportunity to speak about some recent work that we did in this space. And as well, it's really nice to present alongside Cynthia and Stewart in this medium. So basically, the timing couldn't be better because we just completed a national study looking at is there any connection between farmer mental health and farm business management? And we actually just released kind of our final report on this topic, and we'll be communicating a lot about it. But you guys are kind of the first to get a presentation about the results. So it's pretty exciting for us to have this opportunity. So what we wanted to do is, basically this idea came about, I was actually at a Young Farmers Conference, and we had a Doc Calm from Toronto, and he was talking about, much like Cynthia talked about, what are the effects of stress? What are the effects of lack of sleep, and what are the causes? And so talking about, the uncertainty brought by our place in the world, and then, how stress can make it very difficult to make decisions, make it difficult to prioritize, to concentrate interpersonal relations, and kind of got thinking, well, that might have a profound impact on how we're going to manage our farms. So could we maybe look at the impact of mental health on managing the farm? But then on the other side, is there an impact of business management practices on our mental health, kind of good or bad? In some ways, is it daunting and lead to more stress, or in some ways, is it creating a positive mental health experience? So that's what the objectives of this research were. And so this is just the standard research methodology slide. So we were happy to work with Wilton Consulting Group, who were our research team. So we started with an environmental scan, had an advisory committee. Cynthia was one of our members, which we really appreciated. We did a kind of a mix of interviews, focus groups, and then we worked with FCC Vision Panel to do an online survey. So that kind of gives you an idea of kind of our reach of who we talked to in this survey. First and foremost, wanted to hear from farmers, but then of course those out there supporting farmers. So on to our key findings, which is the exciting part. So our findings indicate much like we see in other studies, that a significant portion of farmers are, moderately to highly stressed. We tested different factors of stress. We looked at the Standing Committee's report on mental health challenges for farmers, as well as other literature, and kind of came up with a list of stressors and then tested that. So the top 3 stressors, I guess I would say, is the unpredictability of the ag sector, the workload pressures and lack of time, and financial pressures. And just at the bottom, you can see some of the other stuff we tested, which is significant, but those were our top 3 stressors. So we also saw that the farmers who profile with high stress, and again, this is akin to what Cynthia was talking about, are more likely to change their behavior under a great deal of stress. And sometimes this is for the better, but most of the time this isn't for the better. So producers with high stress scores, some of them were happy to see are crunching numbers and do financial planning, are assessing their business for different outcomes, but they also spend a lot more time working, and that can be detrimental not only to themselves, but also to their family and some of their interpersonal relationships. And then the producers who are scoring high as well are, doing less of, and Cynthia talked about this, attending social and family gatherings, feeling in control of their emotions, sleep, feeling motivated about their work, seeking help from outsiders, making informed decisions in a timely manner, and seeking information or learning. And we know from our other research that a lot of these pieces are actually kind of the characteristics of our top farmers in Canada, seeking information, making decisions in a timely manner. So we kind of see this, not fit with, we know what the farmers that are succeeding are doing, but we know that the stress factors are causing farmers to change their behavior and not necessarily for the better. We also found that looking at different demographics, young farmers tend to resort to less effective coping mechanisms when stressed. This could be a measure of experience or the support that they have around them. And now onto the connections between mental health and farm business management. So we're looking at, I guess to quickly define farm business management, we're looking at kind of those practices that allow you to see the best way to use your resources, whether it's people, whether it's assets, whether it's, living beings or environment. So things like, business planning, budgeting, etc. So we found that in our research, about 21% of farmers indicate they're regularly following a business plan, and 48% indicate that they rarely or never do. And this is important because 88% of the farmers who do follow a business plan say it's contributed to their peace of mind and has helped contribute to lower stress and more positive mental health outcomes. And farmers who use a written business plan also tend to follow other business practices such as record keeping, adhering to a budget, benchmarking performance, seeking training, communicating about the future of the farm with those impacted, etc. So from our research, we can kind of really see that business planning seems to be a key in terms of getting farmers interested about other business management practices and implementing those on the farm. And this is just one of the comments we received from one of the folks that we interviewed. He said, it helps to know where we want to go. That way difficult years don't seem so devastating because there's a plan in place to move forward and a vision of the future. And that's kind of what we really like to see when it comes to thinking about business planning. It's not about predicting the future and what's going to happen, because that could be quite stressful, but just looking at what are the different scenarios that we might face going forward, and what do we do if XYZ happens? So it's kind of having a plan in place so that you have something to fall back on. And then this is interesting as well, and this is something that kind of we're taking on board and thinking, how can we make some improvements here? So when farmers are asked why they don't follow a written business plan, the #1 answer was, I'm succeeding without it, at 41% of farmers saying that. Followed by, I lack the time to dedicate towards it. I believe it requires constant updates. I don't know what to include, and I perceive it to be an overwhelming task. So through this project, we can identify maybe there's some things that we can do to better support business planning and the adoption of other management practices. So this is another comment from a farmer. I try to keep the books up to date, but when it gets busy, that's the first thing I drop. And we hear that a lot. So it's not uncommon, but our research shows that business planning is important, not only to supporting positive mental health, but also to supporting the bottom line. So the recommendations from the research, just quickly wrapping up, is making that connection. So we kind of, when we talk to farmers in focus groups as well as surveys, and talk to advisors too, the thought was around, maybe we could take a risk management approach. So risk management seems to be a language that resonates with farmers within the context of business planning, as well as the peace of mind that can support mental health. So again, the #1 factor influencing stress was unpredictability, uncertainty. So, that causes some concern about risk. So maybe we can start by addressing risks. A team approach is also key, and Cynthia talked about this as well. So building support teams involving advisors, but not just advisors and outsiders as such, but family and peers can alleviate the pressure of decision making or feeling like it's all on your shoulders as well. And a preparedness approach. So planning ahead does not mean predicting the future, it means preparing for whatever might happen. And could we somehow shift the perception of business planning to something around this, around preparedness, rather than trying to predict what's going to happen tomorrow. And so within the report, we actually have these kind of 4 high-level recommendations, and they break it down into an astonishing 24 recommendations, which we'll be communicating about in the coming months. But just in a nutshell, the #1 recommendation is to continue to raise awareness around the importance of farmer mental health. #2, to support the improvement of mental health literacy for farmers and those supporting farmers. #3, deliver business management advice, tools, and training that focuses on risk management and preparedness as a means of facing uncertainty, and advocate for farmer-specific mental health services. So I think that's about it from me, with a big thank you and then just recognition to our funders for the project. And I'll hand it back over to Andrea, and thanks very much.
Great, thank you very much, Heather. So if you can share my screen, and I see Stewart is up there. So Stewart, I will hand it over to you, and I will flip your slides for you.
Great. Thanks everybody for joining us here virtually. I'm still, I don't know about you guys, but I'm still trying to get used to this. It's a lot nicer to be in a room and see everybody's mostly smiling faces, but I guess this is just the world we live in. I'm gonna attempt to try to talk about some of these things from the view of a producer. I am a pork producer, not a beef producer. But I think we do share some similarities in how our business works. And right now, we all know what it's like to be a pawn in a trade war, and we know what it's like to have uncertain marketplaces. And so we do have some interesting commonalities there. To kind of jump in, and I've just got a couple slides. I wanted to share just kind of my own kind of high level things that I think about for myself. And then a couple kind of key trip up points. I've attempted to, if we jump to the bottom there, the gopher holes, we have groundhogs here in Ontario, but I figured everybody or most of the people on here might be from Western Canada. And from my time on a cattle ranch, I had a summer job on a cattle ranch in the Fraser Valley, and it was gophers, it was not groundhogs that would play havoc with the quad bike. Anyways, Support pillars that I use myself. The biggest thing is I kind of view it as almost a web. So maybe pillars aren't the right way of putting it, but a web of supports, different things for different times, and an acknowledgement that what works today as a support pillar may not work tomorrow. It's an ever-evolving kind of target, if you will. For myself, my support is very much people-based. A group of I keep in touch with a lot of college friends from ag college, a lot of friends from growing up, and I've created almost, I guess, a de facto network of people that, depending on what I feel I might need, I can call on. So if I just want to chew the fat about basketball, that's kind of my favorite sport, I call Conrad, my old university friend, and we talk about basketball for an hour, and I might come away from that feeling better. If I've got a specific farm stressor, I've got a group of close friends that are all producers, and you know, you can call up and we can commiserate about something that's happened on the farm and find support that way. I use places though, because for me as well, there are times when there's a place I need to be, or I feel like I need to be, and I'm really lucky. Just a couple kilometers down the road, there's the better part of 300 acres that have all been left in grass. And I find in this particular season of life I'm in, sometimes I just need to go down there and sit and watch the grass cattle for a while, and just let them relax me. And there are different places I found recently as we've started into doing more crop farming at our farm. I found that even just tractor time has become a little bit of it's kind of a double-edged sword. It can be both a release and a stressor, sometimes all at the same time. And that bleeds into the experiences. Things that we can be doing and I use that term, fill your bucket. There's actually a children's story that my son was reading about filling a bucket, and I think it's a really apt analogy. You know, we've got this bucket, there's things that you can put into it to fill it up, and there's times when you pour things out, and the trick is trying to make sure you never let it get right down and empty. And that kind of is a natural segue into the piece around self-care. And self-care is a term that I think gets bandied about a lot. I know for me, if you ask me how I define self-care, I would find it really hard to just wrap it up in a neat little box and say, this is what I do for self-care. What I've kind of looked at it now, it's striving for finding personal happiness or contentment, but acknowledging that, you know, we've created these businesses that we have to run, and there are constraints. So sometimes there are times that, you know, we don't have the luxury of taking a holiday for a few days to give our brain a break. And so what things can we do in the moment or within the constraints of our real life to give ourselves that break? And Cynthia talked about a couple things. And, you know, for some farmers, it's as simple as, you know, making a bit of time to get up to have a cup of coffee on the front porch and watch the sun come up. I'm more of a watch the sunset guy. I'm not so much a sunrise guy, but I think thinking about ways that what can we do within the constraints of our life. And I've found that, you know, myself, I've got 2 young kids. Self-care that worked pre-kids, you know, there's things that I did before we had kids that are harder to do now. And so it's acknowledging that this is not it's not a thing that we can just figure out something that works today and expect it will work tomorrow. It's trying to acknowledge that it's dynamic, and we've always got to be thinking about and being kind of in tune with ourselves and asking ourselves questions, and then going back and counting on some of those loved ones around us to provide us feedback. And then the last piece, kind of from a producer's view, is watching for the gopher holes, the things that trip us up, and we're never going to see everything. But it doesn't mean that we can't try to be vigilant. And I use this analogy because it was my dad and I were actually picking stones last week, and he was retelling a story about my great grandfather who got thrown off a load of hay when they hit a big groundhog hole, and how that brought out his temper. And so, yeah, there are things that, you know, we can think we're chugging along and everything's going fine, and we hit something, and we tumble down, and it's like, okay, well, what do we need to do to pick ourselves back up? And so again, we're never going to be able to see everything that can trip us up along the way, but that doesn't mean that we can't try to watch for things. And my wife and I talk a lot about early warning signals, trying to figure out, trying to establish when I'm coming into a rough patch before it gets really, really bad. And so that's where I'm talking about, I guess, maybe being vigilant. And maybe if you want to switch the slide there for me. So I have a feeling that my picture perhaps is maybe a bigger hole than a gopher hole, but I was attempting to really give some visual representation to my analogy here. And so the first one, ignoring a dry oil reservoir. What do I mean by that? And Cynthia talked about fuel for the body, nutrition and food. And I found, especially just I mentioned these last 2 years when we've ventured into doing more cropping, I can give my body gas. Like I can give it the fuel. I can eat and I can give myself energy. I kind of look at my mental resiliency more as like the lubrication for the whole machine, though. Like it's one thing to have the physical energy to do something, but if our brains are running on empty, everything can come to a screeching halt, even if we've kind of got everything else working physically. And so that dry oil reservoir is, I guess, maybe an analogy for just trying to be aware of our mental resiliency. And again, it's not a binary, we either are resilient or we're not. It's trying to acknowledge that there are times when we're feeling really good and we can probably take on a lot of stressors. And then there are other times where we've really drawn ourselves down. And I think especially with the realities of primary ag production, there are times when we have to kind of quote unquote redline it. The trick is to try to make sure that we're never redlining for too long to the point where we seize the whole machine up. And so that's where I was coming at it with kind of that oil reservoir idea. The next one there is keeping up with the Joneses. And I, my bio, I referenced I had a meandering path with some unexpected detours. I came out of grad school in 2010 and had some plans for how I was going to farm, and I was going to take over the family business, and I was going to do everything right, and I was the smartest guy in the world. And then I got smacked in the face and reminded that I had a lot to learn. And a lot of my angst at that period in life came from comparing myself to other people and comparing what I had to what I perceived others had. And that comparison game is dangerous. I think that it is okay for us to, look at people that we would like to replicate or try to emulate how they've lived their life or how they've run their business. And it's a good thing. And it's a healthy thing to have positive examples that we want to try and follow. But if we start allowing our brain to fall into the trap of, I need this so that I can keep up with X or keep up with the neighbor around the corner, that can really play some serious mental havoc. And so that's just something that, easy to say, hard to maybe put into practice. But if you find yourself, getting to a place where you're unhappy because of perceived shortfalls with what somebody else might have, it can blur our own eyes to the blessings that we do have. And when I went through kind of an acute mental health not example, what's the word I'm looking for? I had a pretty serious brush with depression from 2012 to 2000 and throughout 2013, and it took me having some really tangible examples from other people to remind me that I shouldn't be defining what makes me happy by using a barometer of what other people have. That's happiness is going to be defined personally and through a close circle of loved ones. And that kind of bleeds into the next point here. Weekends at times, and I fall into this trap I fall into this trap often, where we allow our farm business to really overwhelm where we're getting our self-worth. And I used to use a little video to try to illustrate this, where it was we deal with health outbreaks with pig populations with some regularity, and so we dealt with a really difficult E. coli outbreak in one of our production systems. And I showed this video of my son. He was running around checking pigs with me. He's 4 years old, but he was 3 when I took the video, and he was just happy to be in the barn with dad. And in the background of this video, there was a pile of dead pigs that had died from this E. coli outbreak. And if we allow ourselves to not see the joy of the 3-year-old in the barn with us, and we just focus on the dead pigs and the failure, the perceived failure as being a farmer, if we allow too many of those things to bleed in, it can get very difficult to remove ourselves from our farm and to find sources of happiness or sources of self-worth outside of the farm business. And again, that's a really hard thing to say, because there are times or seasons of our production where it really does incorporate everything we do, and from when we wake up to when we go to sleep. I think the challenge is that when we have the periods where we're allowed to step back a little bit, it's finding those non-farm things that we can build up our resiliency and use that for our self-worth. And the last piece, it's very, I guess it's along a similar line of thinking. And again, this is really easy to say when things are going well. It's a lot harder to think about when we are financially stressed. But I work really hard at decoupling financial success from personal happiness, because they are not the same thing. And I mean, it's an age-old cliche that money can't buy you happiness. And my own self, part of my own care is I keep relationships with farmers in Kenya, and I've traveled there multiple times, and I'll often talk. I need to go there every few years to kind of recalibrate my brain and how I view happiness, because for me, getting to work with smallholder farmers in East Africa, it's a really good reminder that financial outcomes have no bearing on happiness. And so, I tell a story of the first time I was there, and I went there very unhappy in the midst of that bout with depression, and I was reminded. I shouldn't say reminded. I was taught the lesson, and it was towards the end of my trip, and it was a dark night. We were in a mud hut, and we were eating ugali, which is, for anybody that has been to East Africa, is a glorified homemade Play-Doh. It's basically flour and water and a bit of salt that's boiled into a bit of a goo, and it's not my favorite thing. But here we are, we're sitting around, there's about 10 people in this mud hut with no electricity, with almost nothing, but sharing a meal, and everybody was laughing and everybody was happy. And outside there were children playing with homemade cars that they used a water bottle and caps, and they would race them around the well outside. And it just struck me that there was just this unadulterated happiness going on. And I was within a group of people that could only dream to have the level of wealth that I had, just being born where I was born. So that's I guess a tangible example for me of things I try to hold on to remind myself that financial success is not the only way that we can achieve happiness. And for me, I've actually found it maybe easier to run our business, or I've freed up some stress from running the business with that core belief that even if you stripped everything away in our farm, everything that we've built, as long as I have my family, I know that I'm going to, I use the phrase, give me a refrigerator box and my wife, Jessica, and I think we should be able to find happiness. Because it's the people, it's those memories, it's my smiling little 4-year-old or my smiling 6-month-old when I get home. Those are things that come at no monetary cost, perhaps outside the diapers, that can provide real happiness. And so again, it's a hard thing to remember when we're in the midst of a financially stressed period on the farm. But it doesn't make it any less important to try to hold on to. So those are just kind of some of the common things that will trip me up that I try to think about. And I'll just close off here just to highlight what Do More has done. So if you want to flip the slide there for me. So the Do More Agriculture Foundation was founded a couple of years ago, and it's really a group of farmers who have come together, and Leslie Kelly, Ray Kelly, and Kim Keller deserve a huge amount of credit for really taking this by the horns, saying, what can we do about this? And the thing I love the most about the Do More Foundation is its focus on community. Because in my, me sitting here in rural southwestern Ontario, which albeit is different from other rural parts of the country, but we do have some similarities, I believe our community is the first line of defense in terms of building resiliency within a community and creating healthy support systems. And so when you're looking for resources, or if you're looking for things that if you're asking yourself, what can I do? There is what's called the Community Fund through Do More Agriculture, which helps to provide funding for communities to do mental health first aid. If you're asked what is mental health first aid, it's actually it's quite literal. It's very similar to the St. John's ambulance clinic, except instead of first aid, we're talking mental health first aid. So it's giving regular people, feed salespeople, veterinarians, anybody up and down our supply chain, and fellow producers, it's giving them some tools, building capacity so that they feel more confident to perhaps be that quote unquote first line of defense, or giving them more confidence to, when you ask the question of the neighbor, how are you doing? You actually have the confidence to say, are you sure you're fine? Because if you want to share, we could talk about this and think about how we could find, talk about how we could help improve your feeling. So right now the applications for that are closed. However, there will be future intakes, and you can just kind of check on the website. The other piece that I wanted to kind of highlight for everybody that Do More does is it is a national foundation. And so what they've kind of got a library of resources that are broken out. There are national resources that are listed within the resource section, and then province-specific resources. And that's something that list is always evolving. And even if somebody who knows of something in their own community that is helping, there's actually a form on there to contact the folks that Do More, that we can add more resources. The goal there is essentially to have a living library of mental health resources, acknowledging that there are a plethora of ways, or a plethora of treatments available. There are all kinds of, like, therapy is not therapy. There's all kinds of different avenues for us as to access care. And that resource page is really an attempt to try to give people a one-stop, okay, you know what, I live in southwestern Alberta, so I can go and I can look and say, okay, these are the national resources that are available to me. These are the Alberta resources that are available to me. And then again, regardless of what province you might live in, that's how that resource page is set up. So yeah, I'd like to thank you for having me on here today, and hopefully we were able to touch on a couple things that you can take home and think about.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Stewart, for your stories and your insight there. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our presentations for today. And I will, if anyone has any questions that they would like to pose to any of the speakers, all of the speakers, if you can just type those into the question window below, and we'll get to them as we go along here. I thought I might just start with one, and I don't know, maybe Cynthia can start this off in terms of her suicide intervention work, but is there one particular trigger that you see specifically for farmers that might sort of take them over the edge to be in a mental health crisis, or is it more of a, just everything piling up?
For me, in providing suicide intervention services, the number one thing that everyone has in common is they've reached a level of hopelessness and helplessness. And it's not even so much that they aren't able to help themselves anymore. One thing I find is that the most difficult thing for a farmer or an egg producer to deal with is if they feel like they're not helping their family anymore, or they feel like they're not helping the farm anymore. Because let's face it, most of us are on generational farms, right? We, you know, it was our parents who started this farm, and the parents before them. So I think that the number one thing that the people that I've helped have in common is they feel hopeless, but they also feel helpless that they're not helping advance their farm anymore. And that is such a difficult place to be in. It's not about being selfish. And I think that that's what a lot of people think. Well, oh, people who choose suicide, that's a really selfish thing. No, actually, that's never on the top of their mind. It's always based on not being able to help the people that they love or honor the farm that they're now on. So I think that that would be the one thing. I can tell you that farmers, we're a resilient bunch. It doesn't matter what kind of production you do. We're a very resilient bunch. I mean, we can outlast drought, flood, BSE, you name it. So, but really, it's more about the people that we love and the land that we love, or the farm that we love. When that reaches a state of like we just don't feel like we're being productive anymore or being successful in whatever capacity we measure that success, that's where the greatest challenges come in.
Great. Maybe Stewart, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and Cynthia brought up a great point. Uh-oh, maybe I froze. Can you still hear me?
We can still hear you. Yeah, your video seems
Okay.
to have frozen a little bit, but
all right.
We can hear
we'll
you.
just I'll talk. You don't need to see me anyways. Cynthia brought up that point about the family piece and the legacy piece. And when I refer to my own dark period, much of my depression was manifesting itself in I was destroying a generational farm. We were in a situation of acute financial stress in the pig industry, and we had expanded kind of under my own. It was me that motivated the expansion, and here we are. I was the 6th generation to farm in Perth County, and I was going to be the one that bring it down. Coming out of that, and I'm going to circle back to that, but coming out of that, something that when I came back to farming and that my wife and I continuously talk about, and it goes back to decoupling financial success from the farm. We work very hard to look at our farm as a business. And is it cool that my ancestors farmed here? Yes, it's cool. But I am not going to let that define who I am anymore. I am not going to say that if things go bad, I have somehow failed my family, because that's an unfair burden to put on ourselves. And so that's an easy thing to say, hard thing to do, but we have to we have to look at ourselves as business people, and if it doesn't make good business sense to be doing what we're doing, then let's change instead of holding on to something and destroying our own self-worth for somehow feeling like we need to honor our family. So that's, and then the only other piece I'd like to add to that, because Cynthia touched on, you know, that feeling of, you know, people might think it's selfish to commit suicide. When I was ready to kill myself, it was not coming from a place of anything other than all I wanted was the pain to stop. I could not sleep at night. I couldn't escape the little voices in my head. It was hell. And I had run out of ideas to try to make that stop. And the only thing I could think of was, if I was dead, I would stop feeling this pain. Now, in my case, I am so incredibly fortunate to have had a little voice in my head the day I was ready to do it say, do one more reach out for help. And that was the first time I really honestly and openly talked to I called my parents and I said, you need to get to this farm right now. And they made a 45-minute drive happen in about 15 minutes. And when that barn door opened and my mother rushed in and did nothing but hug me, I realized that it wouldn't matter if we lost everything that they built. that my parents were going to love me unconditionally. And that didn't fix everything. It did, but all it did was it opened up a glimmer of light at the end of a very dark tunnel that allowed me to see, to, I guess, go on that journey to get to a point where I can talk about some of the being like self-care and some of the things we do today. But yeah, that's a bit of a meandering answer to the question. But if we can work harder at that decoupling ourselves from our farm business and not putting undue pressure on ourselves, like, will I be excited if my children choose to farm? Darn right, I'll be excited about it. There's something that's cool about that family piece, but I will work very hard not to allow them to put undue pressure on themselves to do it out of some sense of duty to the family kind of thing.
And Andrea, if I could just quickly comment as well, we saw the exact same thing in our survey results. We found that young farmers and women in particular were ranked more highly stressed or reported more higher stress than the rest of the farmers. And specific to both of those demographics was the tie to transition planning and the tie to taking care of the family in terms of the women farmers said it's on my shoulders to make sure we stick together for the long term. And in terms of the young farmers, it was, you know, I don't want to be the generation that lost the family farm. And that's a huge weight on my shoulders. And, you know, looking at the statistics around transition planning, you know, my parents aren't doing it. I don't know how to do it. And it's a really, you know, big boulder to push up the hill for this transition planning to be on me. So we saw the exact same thing was contributing to higher levels of stress in both of those demographics tied to that legacy piece of farming.
Yeah, I certainly think it's a big burden that lots of people carry. And thank you, Stewart, for sharing that really personal story with all of us today. If we could just change gears a little bit, this question was for Heather. But what are some of the things that organizations like the CRSB and our other industry organizations can do with the research that you've just released? And maybe you could touch on if there are farmers and ranchers out there that do want to do a business plan that don't have one, if you could direct them to how and where they can get help with that.
Yeah, so in terms of kind of what we can do as an industry, again, I would happy to send out the link through your network to the report, because I can't remember them off the top of my head, but there's, you know, each of those 4 high-level recommendations, you know, has about 4 or 5 other recommendations under it. So, you know, it's about, you know, talking about mental health in agriculture, and it's not, you know, a fad, but we need to give this attention it deserves, and it has deserved for a long time, and give it the appropriate support. So I think, you know, oftentimes in our industry, we get an idea to talk about something, and then the funding starts to go away and trickle away. And like, if we could have a sustained mechanism to keep this conversation going, keep it going at the national level, but also have those regional ties so that, you know, we have that grassroots connection for, you know, for the producers and the people on the ground. As well, making sure that, you know, mental health becomes a staple topic in our ag colleges and universities, for example. So even, you know, 4-H as well, I would say they probably already do it because they're great, but you know, making sure that this is a topic that's just, it's you know, it's just a regular thing that we talk about. And, you know, everyone has, like Cynthia said, everyone has mental health. And it's just, you know, there's this spectrum of where are you on the spectrum? Are you perhaps, you know, leaning towards not so good mental health or really good mental health, and what could cause you to kind of swing each way? So lots and lots of things we can do. And then of course, I highlighted the business stuff. In terms of business planning, there's lots of resources out there. So like, we ourselves have the National Farm Business Management Resource Center, which doesn't allow a very nice acronym, but it's at takeanewapproach.ca. And so we have resources there on starting a farm, expanding your farm, and transitioning your farm, specific to, you know, business planning, but also all the other different plans you can do. And right now we're working on some business toolkits to help farmers along. A lot of the provinces and territories have resources as well. Most of them are free to access, to be honest, because for what we do, the hardest part is getting started and continuing to support farmers as they implement these practices. Because, because it's different, it's new, it's not easy, but you know, if we kind of start small but get started, I think we'll see some good progress. And you know, there's well, now during COVID, there's not as many face-to-face gathering opportunities, but you know, usually there's you know, workshops and conferences. Now there's a lot of webinars, lots of webinars on, you know, how can we manage risk, how can we you know, do a strategic business plan. And I would say, I guess advice would be, you know, start to learn a little bit more about business planning, about, you know, the fact that even I'm thinking of you, Stewart, you know, when we talk about business planning, you know, the budget for me is a very, very small part of the business plan. It's about the process of getting together and sharing your vision and sharing your dreams and goals, and then having something to kind of refer back to when times get tough, or, you know, when you have to weather the storm. You say, well, wait a second, when we were all thinking a little bit clearly and had a little bit more sleep, what did we say we wanted to do and why did we want to do that? And is that still what we want to do? And kind of using that to keep you going and kind of provide that guiding light, you know, through that tunnel that you talked about.
Great. And we're getting close to our time here, but there was one other question that came in here that I thought it would be great to address with all of you. What are some ways to approach someone who you might see some of those signs that their mental health is, you know, decreasing, but they don't want any help, or they don't want people to know that they're struggling? So what are some of the ways that we can help those people? Maybe Cynthia could start.
Sure. I think that right now, even though a lot of people are talking about mental health, there's still kind of like, oh, I don't know if I should say anything. But my kind of motto is better to say something and upset somebody than not say anything, and then that person silences their voice for good, right? And the thing is that if you recognize that somebody is struggling and you say to them, how are you? How's it going? And they say, fine, fine. Ask them a second time, because that means that you actually are genuinely interested. And then when they start talking, be quiet and listen. Don't try to solve their problems, because it doesn't matter what you say or do, you are not the person who can solve their problems. Listening to them is the #1 beneficial thing that you can do for somebody, and provide them a non-judgmental platform for them to share. And then after that, once they have actually kind of unloaded and recognized that, hey, I talked about this and I didn't burst into flames and I didn't explode, and I'm doing okay, they may feel more encouraged to talk a little bit more. And the #1 thing that when people actually do reach out for that first time, whatever the response is to that initial reach out, has the largest implications on a person. So if someone actually starts to share and the person that they're sharing to tries to solve their problems and go, yeah, but you've got this, or maybe you could do this, you shut them down and you cap whatever experience they're having. So please don't do that. If you are concerned about someone, ask them, how are you? And then when they say fine, or whatever they say, if they don't share, ask them again, how are you really? I'm here to listen without judgment. And then do just that.
Great. Stewart, do you have some more to add on top of that?
If I could, and I'm going to put another plug in for mental health first aid, because I think that doing, like, even myself, someone who's been doing mental health talks for a while now, I'm kind of at least 5 years. Even when I did mental health first aid about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, even I felt that I'm sounding like a pompous jerk here. It's not that I know everything. I learned a lot from that, in spite of my kind of previous thinkings on the topic quite a bit. And so when we can use that, mental health first aid is a great way to build capacity, to give people confidence, and give them some strategies that they can adapt when they ask that, are you sure you're fine? But the most important thing that Cynthia said, in my feeling, is don't try to fix it. Because, and I look in my own life, my dad is that type of guy that if there was a feed line not working in the barn, Like I give up after 15 minutes. I'm like, this is dumb. I'm calling a repair guy. And Dad would look at the stupid thing for 3 hours and like, tap here, twist that, do that, and he would fix it. And I'd be like, it's magic. How the heck did you do that? But that works with a feed line, but with a brain where it's like, well, let's fix this problem. And, you know, even as recently as a couple of years ago, Dad'd be like, well, let's just fix it. And I was like, well, I don't know how to fix this, man. This is not something that we just turn a wrench and it's fixed. And I've been amazed in my own personal relationship with my dad, where he's over time been like, I don't need to fix this. Maybe we just need to talk about something that is, and you know, last Saturday night picking rocks was a perfect example, because it has been a stressful time. I'm a very outgoing person who loves people, and this COVID stuff sucks, and I miss people, and it's really starting to wear on me, and the pig business, like the beef business, has had a few unexpected curveballs that have been accompanied with this. So I've been pretty stressed and my resilience has been pretty low. But instead of Dad saying, let's fix this, we literally just went and picked rocks and talked about the state of the world. And while that on itself could be maybe a depressing topic right now, it was just that action of a trusted person that loves me. And we just spent time together, and coming out of that and just kind of taking in God's glory and the sunset. And we ended up stopping and looking at a patch of trilliums for a while, like things that even 3 years ago, my dad and I never would have gone for a walk in the bush to look at flowers. But coming out of that experience, I felt better. I felt more restored. And so I really can't really hammer home enough what Cynthia said about that fixed piece, because it's, you can really cap off a person's future willingness to talk. So it's building up that personal capacity. And if we've got people on the supply chain here on this call, I would really encourage you. I think a great way to be a good corporate citizen is to look at, you know, being a funder of bringing in some mental health first aid training for your staff. Because for a farmer, say in this period of seeding that hopefully most people are coming towards the end of, you know, you've been isolated. Maybe the only person you've talked to is your agronomist for the last 3 weeks outside of your. So if the agronomist has that capacity built in through some mental health first aid to feel confident and able to ask that second, are you fine? Those are the kinds of real meaningful change that we will make. And this is not to come across as a slight towards like national and provincial initiatives, but I firmly believe that the best positive impact we can have is building capacity at the local community level. Because if we live in rural Canada, chances are we don't have the greatest internet, we're isolated. Our neighbors and our supply chain partners are the people with the most regular touch points with us. So if we can have capacity within that to ask those second, are you fine? To me, that's where we're going to have the most meaningful change. And the great byproduct is down the road, we'll be fixing things. So that's kind of my take on that.
That's great. Thanks very much. And sorry, Heather, go ahead. Did you want to add
That's
something?
okay. I'll try to be really quick. And just to pick up on what Cynthia and Stewart were saying, there's already some great examples of some programs across Canada, of course, the Do More Ag First Aid, but also in Quebec, they have the Sentinel program that just won the award from the CFA for kind of supporting mental health. And that's where they're giving, you know, vets and agronomists and advisors and anyone that kind of, you know, goes to the farm on a regular basis, the tools and some of the resources to have a first conversation with the farmer, or just kind of be aware and check in, how is the farmer doing, and then them being aware of the resources as well. And I was just actually on a webinar just watching it yesterday in the UK, and they have some similar programs there. And so through our Healthy Minds, Healthy Farms project, we're kind of trying to see if we can steal some ideas from places that are doing things really well and make that available to the rest of Canada. So it's kind of exciting to think about, you know, all the things that we can do in this space, and all the people, you know, kind of coming through the woodwork to be supportive, such as yourself for putting on this presentation. So thanks again. But yeah, there's lots of good stuff out there that I think we can, you know, beg, borrow, and steal, and then find out some gaps and fill them up. So
That's great. Thanks very much. And we've gone a little bit over time, but I think this was a really, really great discussion, and we thank you all for your perspectives. There were a few questions that we didn't get to, so we will try and connect with our speakers and have them provide some written responses, which we will get out to our attendees and those that registered today, and get those out within the next few days. So with that, I will hand it over to Monica to do a quick wrap up to the webinar today.
Great. Thank you. And just to echo Andrea's comments, I would just like to, a huge thank you to Cynthia, Heather, and Stewart for being with us today. And thank you to everyone for their participation. I noticed that the majority of the attendees that joined are still on, so that means that the information that's being provided is really relevant and important. I just wanted to highlight from a CRSB perspective, we have a couple of upcoming events, so just visit our website if you're interested in learning more. And if you flip to the next slide, we just wanted to highlight a quick overview of our sustainability journey at the CRSB, and this just shows how much we can do together, collaborating and working together to advance bee sustainability conversations in Canada. And then with that, I would just again like to thank everybody for joining us today, and don't hesitate to reach out with any questions or comments. We hope that you stay healthy and safe and have a wonderful day. Thank you.